If you think audit logs are just boring tables of activity, think again. There's a reason your licensing costs keep creeping up and reports pop up that no one remembers creating. Today, I'm exposing the suspicious signals hidden inside your Power BI environment and how a single dashboard can show you patterns you didn't even know existed. Stick around and I'll break down exactly which metrics truly matter when it comes to governance and why missing them is costing your organization more than you think. Audit logs, your organization's canary in the coal mine. If you've ever looked at your Power BI audit logs and immediately zoned out, you're not alone. Most admins still see these logs as a bland list of user clicks, a formality you check off once and then ignore unless there's a direct compliance request. But the truth is, these logs keep a low profile precisely because the most alarming indicators don't jump off the page. The details are quiet, almost invisible, and that's exactly why they go unnoticed until someone asks, why did our licensing bill explode last quarter? Or why did that sensitive dashboard end up with an external consultant? The sheer amount of data in Power BI audit logs offers the illusion of security. If you scroll for long enough, you'll hit a wall of view report and share dashboard events mixed with an occasional login or dataset refresh. You start to assume it's all routine noise unless you have a reason to dig deeper. But buried in the ordinary, you'll often find outliers that don't fit the pattern. Maybe you spot one premium workspace that's only used after hours, or notice a sequence of add member actions in a workspace that was supposed to be locked down. By that point, most admins are used to seeing so many entries, they miss the connections that link separate events into a bigger problem. Microsoft's own incident reviews keep surfacing the same types of oversights. Dormant reports, content that's been abandoned for months, show up during security audits and investigations. These so-called ghost datasets aren't just clutter. They can keep consuming compute resources and licensing, especially if they remain tied to abandoned workspaces or old sharing groups. Attackers know how to exploit this. A dormant report with open permissions makes for a perfect place to stash sensitive info or launch a slow drip of data to an outside account. It's easy to look at a set of 2 a.m. access logs and chalk them up to early risers, but do you really know if everyone logging in from a Kuala Lumpur IP at midnight is supposed to be there? Most organizations stick to reviewing their logs a few times a year, maybe after an audit or when a user complains that they got locked out. That's not nearly enough. The risk isn't in one big breach or a flashy headline. It's in the drip, the slow leaks, the unnoticed piles of wasted resources and permissions that keep expanding because nobody's watching the full picture unfold. If you've ever had to explain an unexpected spike in licensing costs, take a look at your audit logs for premium workspaces that haven't been active in months but still generate bills every cycle. It's the sort of mistake that's hard to catch if you only focus on the surface. But it's not just about catching waste. Shadow it is alive and well inside Power BI environments. Someone creates a workspace for a pilot project, shares it with 6 people outside their department, then forgets it exists. Next month, the call comes, why did these users get access to sensitive dashboards? Most times, the audit log did record the sharing event. It just looked like any other entry at the time. Without the right context, it's impossible to spot that these were unusual users or that the share happened at an odd hour from a new device. It takes a different approach to piece those clues together, especially since malicious actors exploit the fact that no one's connecting the dots between logins, access patterns, and changes to membership. Let's talk about the kinds of signals that tend to slip through. Audit fields like view reports seem harmless until you isolate events coming from strange IP addresses or see a burst of access outside normal business hours. Add member logs often get ignored, but repeated adds and removes to the same workspace are a classic precursor to privilege escalation or insider threats. Organizations that only parse for failed logins or simple file access are missing where the fire starts. Microsoft's post-incident reports note that most breaches leave a trace in the audit logs weeks before someone realizes what went wrong, often masked by basic activity that sits just outside standard review criteria. Here's where governance dashboards become more than a buzzword. If you're just downloading audit logs to Excel and filtering for unusual activity, you're still missing patterns that build up over weeks or months. A smart dashboard can overlay these signals, correlating odd viewing hours with rarely used premium capacity or highlighting repeated membership changes in stale workspaces. Suddenly, that wall of log data turns into a live map. of what's brewing under the surface. You get more than just hindsight. You start seeing trends as they form. Now, consider what would happen if you could pin down just 3 signals, maybe odd participation in premium workspaces, bursts of external sharing at night, and a slow but steady growth in dormant content. These are the warning lights that tend to flash before a major incident, not just in input logs, but in every real-world post-mortem Microsoft has published over the past 2 years. With the right visualization, you move from hoping the logs will tip you off to actively watching them surface the next potential issue in real time. That's the advantage, turning high-volume log noise into actionable insight. Suddenly, you're not sifting through thousands of lines for a single missing puzzle piece. Instead, you have a live feed showing you what's off track before it spirals into a budget or compliance headache. Of course, as useful as audit logs are, they don't cover every angle. Some of the biggest risks hide outside those entries, waiting in data sources that most dashboards never touch. Beyond logs, data sources you're probably missing. If you've ever set up a Power BI governance dashboard and thought, I guess this is all the info we can get, I have some bad news. Most dashboards barely scratch the surface. Audit logs are just one part of the picture. But if you really want to see how your environment works, you have to go deeper. There's this ongoing myth in most IT teams that the logs tell the whole story, as if every problem is marked with a flashing red flag in the audit table. What actually hides the biggest issues are data sources most admins never bring into their dashboards in the first place. We're talking about the settings and metadata that sit quietly in the background. Think tenant settings, workspace metadata, and that tangle of API-driven license assignments that rarely see the light of day. Those are the blind spots where waste and compliance problems love to hide out, waiting for quarter end or the next audit to rear their heads. Tenant settings, for example, shape what users can and can't do with sharing, publishing, and even inviting guests. You'd think most organizations would keep these settings front and center, but I've seen plenty of teams who set them once during rollout and then never revisit them. The thing is, those configurations drift over time. New features come out, exceptions are made for one department's request, and suddenly it's a patchwork of old rules and unanswered questions. That's before you even get to workspace metadata, which is like a living ledger of how scattered your BI work really is. Each workspace has properties, owner, members, premium status, last modified date, that expose a whole underbelly of sprawl and forgotten projects. It's incredibly easy to have dozens of pilot or testing workspaces stick around for years after the original team moves on, quietly hoarding storage and even gobbling up premium capacity if no one's watching. License data might be the most underused source of governance information, but it can reveal the sort of inefficiency you feel in your budget long before you see it flagged in audit logs. Most Power BI admins know how to see who has a license, but not enough join that with actual usage. The result, you get stuck with seats assigned to people who never even open the app, or premium licenses burning up dollars just so one person can run a refresh once a quarter. I worked with a global firm that pulled these data sets together and found that 17% of their premium users hadn't opened a single premium report in 3 months. Nobody noticed until the dashboard made that connection. Suddenly, a silent drain on the budget turned into a clear opportunity for license reallocation. Then there are Microsoft 365 admin APIs and Azure AD logs, basically your behind-the-scenes security camera. Most folks ignore the admin APIs unless something is broken, but these are gold mines for surfacing unusual user behavior and linking it to wider trends. Azure AD logs flag not just login activity, but all the permission changes happening across the organization. Think external sharing that was temporary but never closed, or permissions that creep over time as project teams shuffle. A lot of licensing waste and compliance problems aren't about a single dashboard at all, but about how sharing policies get bypassed, how workspaces proliferate, and how access is granted and never revoked. Sticking to what comes out of the box in Power BI is like looking through a straw at your environment. You're going to see the numbers Microsoft gives you, active users, reports accessed, but never who shouldn't have been there or where resources are pooling up with no accountability. When you pull audit logs, workspace, metadata, and tenant settings into a single view, the gaps start to close. Suddenly, you notice a wave of new workspaces created by contractors or clusters of inactive premium users attached to inactive content. Stale datasets stand out, especially when you overlay their refresh status with assigned licenses and actual report views. Putting it together, A true governance dashboard isn't another compliance checklist to ship off to auditors. It becomes a surveillance system for your ecosystem, a real-time map showing how many workspaces no one's touched in months, which departments are spreading low-value content, and exactly where your sharing settings don't align with official policy. Instead of waiting until someone asks why the dashboard bill went up again, you see opportunities for license cuts, workspace cleanup, and access tightening before they become pressing problems. Imagine opening your dashboard to a single view, where it's immediately obvious which premium workspaces are ghost towns, which users haven't used their assigned licenses, and where external sharing events spike above your comfort level. That's not something you get from audit logs alone or even from Power BI's standard usage reports. This approach lifts the hood on Power BI sprawl and waste using a web of interconnected signals most teams miss because they never thought to cross the streams. It's not just about having data, it's about having the right data put together in a way that actually tells the story of risk and inefficiencies. Suddenly, compliance isn't a painful postmortem, it's a proactive process. You spend less time explaining why costs ballooned or why shadow IT spaces popped up because your dashboard is flagging these before they spiral. With all these pieces working together, what you have is more than compliance. You have a live, explorable map of what's really going on in your Power BI environment. And that puts you in the driver's seat as you help your leaders make informed, timely decisions instead of playing cleanup after the fact. Now, the question is, how do you turn all of these numbers into clear actions that actually move the needle with executives? Metrics that expose sprawl, waste, and risk. If you've ever watched your Power BI licensing bill grow, but your usage numbers barely budge, you're in familiar company. That disconnect almost always traces back to the signals nobody's tracking, the ones that actually expose waste and risk across your environment. Most dashboards give you the basics: who logged in, how many times a report was viewed, maybe a rough count of dataset refreshes if you're lucky. Those are helpful for a surface level sense of activity, but don't tell you where things are slipping through the cracks. It's these day-to-day gaps that quietly drain your budget and leave you vulnerable to compliance headaches nobody wants to explain to the finance team. Let's take a look at what these overlooked metrics really hide. We've all seen dashboards stuffed with login counts and general activity charts, but that doesn't help when a dozen users with premium licenses haven't touched a premium report in months. If you only watch high-level usage and logins, you're missing entire sections of waste, and the risk builds where no one's watching. Take inactive premium users, a common but invisible sink for licensing spend. These are people officially assigned licenses, even costly premium ones, who aren't using premium features at all. It happens more than you'd think, especially in organizations that automate license assignments or never audit who actually needs advanced access. This is how three-figure per user costs pile up quietly, the data buried somewhere in a spreadsheet that no one owns. Then there's the issue of dataset refresh failures. Out of sight, out of mind, right? I've seen dozens of BI teams only realize the business is working off stale data after the wrong number shows up in an executive meeting. A refresh fails, no alert, no one catches it, and that data set keeps holding the last good value. The impact gets real. Decisions made on data that's days or even weeks out of date. Microsoft's own best practices now explicitly recommend tracking dataset refresh failure rates over time because each failure isn't just a technical hiccup, it's a direct risk to decision quality and compliance reporting. Every so often you hear about a company that stumbles across an orphaned workspace. That's a workspace created by someone who's since left the company, but which sticks around sucking up licenses, storing old data, and sometimes retaining sensitive access rights no one's auditing. It's a classic example of sprawl, the slow, steady growth of spaces and assets that don't actually contribute to business goals. I worked with a client who discovered a wave of these orphaned workspaces after a round of layoffs. Each one still had active licenses and sometimes even data connections. Multiply that by dozens or hundreds, and you can imagine what it does to both your cost and compliance profile. But it's not just about money. Shadow-eyed creeps in through genuine user needs. Someone builds a workspace outside approved channels, invites a few people, and suddenly you have sensitive reports floating in spaces with no oversight. If you aren't tracking workspace proliferation, how many new workspaces are created each month, who's spinning them up, what status they have, you're missing the precursor to both data leaks and audit findings. A spike in new workspaces is often the first sign of a major project spinning out of governance, or a team finding official processes too slow so they go rogue. External sharing brings its own headaches. Most dashboards won't tell you about reports or data sets being shared beyond your organization unless you pull and correlate the right audit events. Microsoft's security teams repeatedly flag reports shared externally as one of the top vectors for compliance violations, not because it's always malicious, but because sharing outside your tenant often happens without anyone realizing just how far your data can travel. As an admin, you want a simple signal. Which content is leaving the boundaries of your business, who sent it, and when it happened. If that's buried behind 3 levels of exports, you're going to miss it until the fallout lands on your desk. That's why experts recommend treating these governance metrics like a vital signs monitor for your BI ecosystem. Numbers like inactive premium users, consistent refresh failures, orphaned and proliferating workspaces, and external sharing events show you the health of your environment well before you see full-blown symptoms. Ignore 1 or 2 of them for too long, and the whole environment's risk profile shifts under your feet, sometimes without any visible warning until the auditors come knocking. Now, it's one thing to track every possible metric, but that's another recipe for dashboard overload. The trick is identifying and highlighting the handful of numbers that signal genuine risk or waste. When done right, you show trends over time, like a slow but steady rise in new workspaces, or create targeted alerts for a spike in refresh failures. One organization rolled out a monthly snapshot of inactive premium users by department, and that simple chart led to $20,000 in reclaimed licenses in a single quarter. It's proof that tracking the right numbers translates directly to real-world savings and cleaner compliance audits. So we've talked about what to watch, but here's the real question. How do you build a dashboard that executives actually use to make decisions? The answer isn't a wall of figures, but visuals that cut through the noise, a point we'll tackle next as we show what it takes to move leaders from passive observers to active stewards of your Power BI environment. Making governance data actionable, visualization that drives change. If you've ever had that moment where you open a dashboard and see rows and rows of numbers, you know exactly how fast attention fades. It's the sort of thing that makes most leaders nod politely and then keep their plans exactly the same. The data might be right, and it might even be tracking all those key metrics, license waste, shadow IT, compliance risk, but if the dashboard is just a wall of figures, it's almost guaranteed to get ignored. The reality is anyone making decisions from a governance dashboard wants one thing above all else: clarity, not an index of raw audit logs, not a spreadsheet's worth of every user action. They need to see in a glance whether things are getting better or sliding off track, and where their attention matters most. Building that kind of visual dashboard takes a bit of restraint. It's a tough sell for technically minded teams who want to capture everything, but leadership isn't interested in the granular details. What they need are signals, not every note in the song, but the melody that shows if something is actually urgent. I've seen this play out time and again. One company showed their executive team a simple heat map that sliced premium license usage by department. It didn't highlight every user or call out every inactive workspace. It just shaded the departments where licenses consistently went unused. The result, leadership reallocated thousands in underused spend within weeks. That same data had been sitting there for months in audit logs, completely overlooked until the visualization made it obvious. It's about surface, not burying the issue. KPIs, trend lines, and conditional formatting do the heavy lifting here. A basic count of failed dataset refreshes means little until you add a rolling trend line and set some conditional formatting: red for spikes in failure, green for improvement, gray when things stay steady. The same goes for tracking shadow IT. If your dashboard highlights sudden increases in new workspaces or unexplained boosts in external sharing, you're making it easy to spot risk at a glance. Conditional colors, icons, or even subtle warnings can steer attention where it belongs, rather than hiding it 2 clicks deep behind a pivot table. The trap most organizations fall into is trying to serve every possible detail on a single page. You get dashboards with columns for every audit event, every workspace, and every user, more overwhelming than helpful. When that happens, real issues blend into the background noise. Nobody's going to spot the pattern unless they have hours to pore over the details, and nobody in the C-suite is going to do that. The dashboards that actually prompt action are the ones that call out risk or waste directly and visually. I remember another case where simply highlighting failed refresh rates as a KPI right next to the count of stale reports and active premium licenses, pushed leaders to question why so many licenses existed for content no one trusted anymore. There was no detailed breakdown, just summary visuals and the right color signals. To really drive action, combine different strands of governance data into one page. Your usage metrics become a layer right alongside license assignments and risk indicators. This is where most built-in Power BI usage reports come up short. They keep everything siloed. But if you build a dashboard where, say, a surge in new workspaces appears next to a spike in external shares, or you show orphaned workspaces lined up with assigned but unused licenses, you unlock connections that were previously invisible. It's the combination, not just the collection, that highlights the real story. Think about your dashboard the way air traffic controllers watch their console. It's not the number of planes that matters, but which ones are off course, which are running low on fuel, and where there's a sudden uptick in the unexpected. Your visuals should bring forward the outliers, the trends that diverge from the baseline, the risks that pop up faster than expected, the moments where an otherwise quiet metric suddenly spikes. Indicators like this prompt immediate questions and, more importantly, fast decisions. It turns governance into something active, not reactive. Another crucial trick: make it obvious where to focus next. Maybe you use a simple RAG, red, amber, green status on key metrics, or enable drill downs for leaders who want to understand why a specific department racks up so many inactive premium users. But even with that option, keep the top-level dashboard uncluttered. It should show enough to trigger curiosity or alarm, just enough to draw focus, but not so much that it paralyzes with detail. When leaders see trend lines that show costs creeping up as engagement stays flat, or when they notice repeated spikes in workspace creation following department reorganizations, it suddenly becomes much easier and much more compelling to approve license cuts or push for process changes. I've seen more than one CIO make a strategic call to invest in access control solely after seeing a dashboard that mapped external sharing spikes against content sensitivity. That's what actionable visualization does, gives executives the confidence to act. It's about building trust. If leadership looks at your dashboard and feels confident they understand what's happening without a technical degree, they're far more likely to follow through on what the data's telling them. And that means suddenly you've shifted governance from a monthly pain point to something everyone can get behind. So if you've ever wondered what a dashboard looks like when it actually changes behavior instead of just reporting on it, it starts here, with visuals that keep people watching, questioning, and making those calls while the risks are still manageable. But of course, even the clearest dashboard is only as healthy as the system behind it, especially as your Power BI ecosystem grows, shifts, and keeps evolving. If you've ever tried explaining a random spike in your Power BI bill or fielded questions about a stray dashboard that shouldn't exist, you know how reactive governance can get. A real governance dashboard isn't just there for show. It's the thing watching for early signals you'd otherwise miss. It doesn't just track spend or log incidents either. It makes connections, nudges you when something's off, and helps spot risks before they turn into messes. If you want fewer nasty surprises and a tighter grip on costs, it's time to let your dashboard do some heavy lifting and surface the patterns.